listening to the Retail Razor Show, where your expert hosts and their guests cut through the clutter in retail and retail tech to shape the future of retail.
Hello and welcome to the first episode of Season 5 of the Retail Razor Show, one of many podcasts in the growing Retail Razor podcast network, where we bring you the practical knowledge you need to stay ahead in the retail world. I'm Ricardo Belmar.
And I'm Casey Golden. Welcome to the Retail Razor, fans and followers, to retail's favorite podcast where we cut through the clutter to give you sharp insights on what's happening on retail today and tomorrow. It's the show for product junkies, commerce technologists, retail leaders, and everyone else in retail and retail tech alike.
Oh, that lead-in just really brings a smile to your face, doesn't it?
It does.
So here we are. We have made it to Season 5 of the show.
Yes, and it's not our only show anymore either, is it, Ricardo?
That is true. I see you caught my little blurb at the start about the Retail Razor Podcast Network. Just kind of slipped that one in there just ever so discreetly.
I don't think there was anything discreet about that. You can't just casually drop that mention right at the start of the podcast without at least giving our listeners a little bit more details. I mean, come on now, Ricardo.
All right, you got me there. Okay, so for those listeners new to the show, to this show at least, and a special welcome to you, of course, but longtime listeners will probably already be talking into their phones or laptops or wherever they're playing this right now.
Or on their TVs, right? They could be watching us right now on YouTube on their big screen TV. Didn't I hear the recent stats that YouTube is the world's new number one podcast destination?
Yeah.
And we've also heard that more YouTube videos are now watched through the TV YouTube app in our iPhones and smartphones.
Yeah, that's true. I read that too. So fans could actually be watching us right now on their big screen TV, larger than life. So I'll just let you ponder that one for a minute, Casey. Think about it right now. Those viewers, they're basically watching king-size versions of us talk all about retail to them from their TVs. So it's a good thing we're naturally, as always, looking our best for this recording right now. And we're getting away with saying we have a face for radio anymore.
Oh, it's like my worst nightmare. But I'm here for it. So while my insecurities get set aside for the next 15 minutes, tell me more about the podcast network.
Right. Yes. So as loyal fans know, last season and last year, we launched the Retail Razor Podcast Network with our first spinoff show, the Retail Razor Blade to Greatness.
Yes. Our first spinoff, though, wouldn't you call that like our second show? First spinoff, second show, somehow just doesn't quite sound right.
Yeah. Okay. I guess there's a technicality there. Yeah, sure. It's our second show. Yes. It's first spinoff, second show. We'll have to pick one of those. So Blade to Greatness, where we focus on retail leadership skills with the most amazing and knowledgeable experts in the field of leadership and career coaching in retail. We wrapped up season 1 of that show in early December, and we'll have season 2 coming soon this spring for that.
Awesome. It's super exciting. We launched our third show this year. Or the second spinoff show,
right?
Retail Razor Data Blades. And I'm such a huge fan of this one. I love customer data.
That's true. You absolutely do. And we could talk all day about how critical a customer data platform is, right? But that's a topic for another episode before we jump into that one.
Well, I'm always looking forward to the conversation.
Without a doubt. So we did also wrap up season 1 of Retail Razor Data Blades just last month, in fact. And yes, we are going to be bringing out season 2 later this year, hopefully later this spring. So if you haven't listened to or watched on the YouTube channel either of these new shows yet, then go get on that right now and go kick off some serious binge watching or binge listening if you're not watching us on YouTube, right? Right after you finish this episode to get yourself caught up on all things Retail Razor Show.
And the best thing, okay, not the best thing, but one of the best things about both of these shows, Blades to Greatness and Data Blades, is that each episode is a nice and tightly squeezed snippet for your enjoyment, with most being 10, 15 minutes or less, just the occasional longer episode when the topic is like particularly juicy.
Yeah, in fact, I think there's maybe only 1 or 2 episodes that went over 15 minutes, but they were definitely worth it with those topics.
Absolutely. So now everyone is up to speed and clear on all the new shows. There's no excuse.
That's right.
So get out there and enjoy, share, give us your feedback.
That's right.
Hopefully you'll learn something from those podcasts. I know we did.
That's right. That's right. And actually, just now as you're describing them, I think I learned how to correlate new action words to describe our podcast, like squeezing and juicing. That was pretty impressive, Casey. I'm going to have to remember how to use that next time.
Oh, boy. I need to take your Canva account away from you.
You're going to make me promise not to have like oranges being squeezed in the next cover art, right?
Yes. Oh, well, let's also remind everyone that if you're using Apple Podcasts, you can now find the Retail Razor channel in the list of podcasts and subscribe to all of our shows conveniently right there. That's where you'll find me.
That's right. You might even say you can conveniently find them all in one basket, ready to help get all those retail juices flowing.
Okay, fine.
I had to work that in there.
Let's talk about this episode instead.
Okay, let's talk about this episode instead. Well, this is one of my favorites to kick off the new season, and to mark that kickoff, we are going to be talking about retail media with an amazing guest today. Someone who's been right there since the early days of retail media. In fact, he was one of the original architects of Walmart Connect in the US and Canada, where he quickly scaled that business to $2 billion and beyond. And that included insourcing the business, establishing the brand and sales enablement practices, leading internal change management, developing the in-store advertising strategy. I mean, all these different things you might not think of that you need when you're starting what is essentially a pure media business inside of a major retailer.
And he was also the founding member of Walmart's e-commerce and digital marketing platforms. And of course, as many also know him, he was the CMO of one of our favorite video commerce platforms, Firework.
That's right. And today he's the Chief Strategy Officer at Vantage, the leading orchestration layer for retail and commerce media. So is the suspense just killing you now after we've built this up so much? Isn't it exciting?
Of course, 1000%. So we're talking about Drew Cashmore. Drew is our guest today, and I can't wait to get this conversation started. So what do you say we just jump in?
Let's do it. Here's our conversation on the evolution of retail media, where the future lies, with a real retail media champion and just all-around retail media superstar, Drew Cashmore. Welcome to the Retail Razor Show, Drew. We are so incredibly excited to have you here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
This really is a thrill to have you, Drew. Obviously, retail media is such a hot topic on our show, and it's a dominating conversation in retail right now. It's just growing like crazy, but all rapidly growing tech-based solutions in retail. It's got its ups and its downs, strengths, and not so strong aspects.
Which we have talked about on the show before too, particularly areas like measurement, around performance of retail media. We've touched on challenges and retailers having implementation, especially adding in-store capability. But I know one of the areas I'm looking forward to talking about with you today around those challenges is your background and how you get retail media off the ground successfully, making it a growth engine for retail, and really jump into this turning point we're in. And you've said this many times. We've seen you talk about this. So I think we should just jump right in. What do you think, Casey?
Yeah. Drew, kick us off with a little bit about you and your background.
I like it. So first of all, thank you again for having me. I've listened to this show for a long time, and I really appreciate what both of you are doing here. Yeah. I have been in the retail media space for a long time now, so over 15 years. I started at Walmart in this regard in 2009 to build a small advertising business in the Canadian market to offset the cost of e-commerce. So treated purely as a profit center and funding the overall e-commerce team. Scaled that to be what was at the time the largest RMN in the Canadian market. And then the US team was contemplating what to do with their reasonably nascent and stalled retail media business there. And so I was part of that, brought down as part of the initial leadership team to San Francisco, and was responsible for building what became a $4.5 billion retail media business in Walmart Connect. And so led that or was part of that team for a fair amount of years, moved on to be the CMO of a live shopping platform, which played on the periphery of retail media. And today I sit in a company called Vantage, which is an orchestration layer for retail media, connecting a bunch of disparate tools and systems into a single unified workflow. as well as functioning as a consultant around the world for retailers and in terms of how do they grow and scale their retail media business. So stayed very close to this space and very excited about where it goes from here.
Well, it's great. It's not like anybody's graduating with a degree in retail media right now. So
yes,
I think that might be part of why these podcasts on retail media do so well.
That's
a lot of courses on it, though.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are evolving. So Drew, it's safe to say like retail media is evolving rapidly. What do you see as the biggest driving forces behind this shift? You know, why do you believe the next 2 years will potentially be a turning point for the industry?
It's a couple things. One is that you're seeing a significant amount of waste and fraud in overall digital marketing. And so there's certainly a change in the way in which dollars are flowing through digital marketing in totality. And frankly, advertisers are looking for a new and safer home. And so monies are moving into retailers because that place is much more consistent than I think some of the rest of the internet. Yeah. And the other piece of this, and I think this is probably more important at a macro level, there is a lot of money that is already sitting in retail by way of advertising, in shopper marketing and trade marketing. And those monies are simply transitioning into what is retail media. And so what looks like at an individual retailer level, what looks like astronomical growth in advertising dollars into an RMN is often just a lift and shift of other dollars that are already sitting in the retailer and being repurposed for this new either digital or kind of new technology platform. And I think that if I look at what is going to help it grow in the future is investing in differentiation and investing in a competitive platform that is going to stand you up not only against other retailers, but against the behemoths like Walmart and Amazon, and against other players in the space like Google and Meta, which are highly sophisticated.
Is the majority of that shift coming from the shopper marketing dollars, Drew, or is it coming from other, or I guess maybe the question is, how much of it is really coming from that shopper marketing budget versus other advertising mediums? Is there a shift from, is it linear TV dollars that brands are bringing over into this? Is it other internet advertising spend that's shifting to the RMNs? Is it really all of the above? And where do you think the kind of the distribution is coming from?
So if you zoom out at a macro level, you've got a consensus of growth to about 110 billion. If you strip out Amazon and Walmart, that looks more like 15 to 20 billion. And if you spread that across all of retail, you're looking at maybe 20 to 50 million per individual retailer. So there isn't a ton of monies that are going into anyone but Amazon and Walmart and a few of the other large players today. And so that's to say that if the smaller retailers or the more nascent retail media businesses are capturing dollars, I do believe that most of this is just a shift in shopper. And then the monies that have been placed in traditional media locations like linear TV or even print are going into comparable solutions at Amazon and Walmart and whatnot. And so I think we're not seeing a ton of incremental dollars that are flowing into the more nascent retail media business or the smaller RMNs. Those monies are a shift internally. And I should say, the retailer doesn't often see those dollars. So in early stages, a lot of these shopper efforts were outsourced or are outsourced to third parties. And you see activations in store and in and around the retailer that are powered entirely out of the control or visibility of a retailer. And so it does look like it's net new dollars, but it was always surrounding that retailer in some capacity.
So at least in some indirect way, it was still impacting them and getting there. Yeah, interesting. So one of the areas we've been talking about more on the show around retail media is the whole question around ROI. Our brands, obviously, retailers want them to invest more in the retail media and across from all these different areas and shifts that you're just describing. But are they really seeing a return right now? Or are we at that point where the ROI is, I want to say, both measurable and somewhat obvious to the brand that it's there? And if not, where's that disconnect coming from between the promise of what they should be able to get from advertising and retail media versus the actual performance? And maybe I'm sure it's a different perspective, both from brands versus the retailers.
I think as a baseline, it's important to go back to where this all started, which is presence at point of purchase. And so in the infancy of investment within retail, and Casey, this goes back to something we were talking about earlier, brands need to be present. Brands need to be at the place where people are reaching for their wallets or reaching on the shelf to buy a product. And if you're not doing that, your competitors are. And so in the infancy and in the way in which we should think about retail media to start, just be present when people are actually making a purchase. It's not to say that I think measurement is not important. It's something that we need to evaluate at a more macro level against all of our other media investments. But retail media has, I think, two core purposes. One is growth and measurable growth. And two is being where your customers are. And so I'm not really directly answering your question, but I don't know if it truly matters, because if you're not there, somebody else is there, and you're investing millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in the open market, driving people to a place to purchase and not present.
Is there a bench? Oh, sorry, Ricardo.
No, I just think it's more like the opportunity is what you're saying is almost more valuable than that direct ROI.
Agreed.
Is there a benchmark that's essentially retailers or brands are chasing, like 3x, 6x?
No, and
we typically would measure like a ROAS. Are we looking at the same type of benchmarks?
You're seeing dollars flow into the big players because they are showing real return. And so I don't want to discount that a lot of the major investments are flowing into places where brands can definitively say this thing is working. I think benchmarking is really, really challenging for our space right now, because the way in which we attribute the timing of the campaign and the way in which we attribute value to the campaign, those are all different by retailer. There's efforts obviously towards measurement standardization, but that also requires a level of sophistication within the retailer to be able to build for those standardized measurement capabilities. And we're not, frankly, there yet. The other piece that I spend a lot of time considering in this is that the macro media models that look at MTA and MMMs that are predicated on reach and frequency for frankly the lowest cost do not match up with the way in which retail media is bought, higher cost, more targeted reach. And so if you look at retail media relative to all of your other activity in the open web and on TV and whatnot, it looks like the stuff you're doing outside of retail performs much better than the stuff that you're doing in retail. And it's really hard to create a benchmark across all of your media in that.
Perfect. Everybody can update their decks.
Well, it's kind of like almost like hitting a little bit of a ceiling from the retailer's perspective in terms of capability you can offer to the brands for that. So how is that impacting the overall business model for this? I mean, it would seem that a retail at different stages in their evolution, right, and growth of retail media is going to hit different challenges in that sense. So do you see like a next model that's going to improve or change or be something that some of these RMNs pivot to get around these issues?
I talk about this great stall in the retail media space. That is, the behemoths in the space have accelerated so much and are able to invest so much more in their platforms and the tools in which they help advertisers spend money, that everybody else is falling further and further behind. And so the monies that are flowing into this space that are net new are either going to the top or not entering the space at all. And as a result, you're seeing a lot of retailers just simply not growing or growing less than the market. And that is a challenge for more nascent players and all the way up to mid-stage RMNs that have been in the market for a long time. I think this goes back to what Amazon and Walmart and Instacart did really, really well, which was invest in their business. And this is something that we talk about a lot now in this space is, if you want to create a competitive media offering, you need to pay for it. These are not free dollars that are going to flow into individual retailers if you don't have the right solutions. We need to make it easier and more appealing for advertisers to buy at a retail level. And we need to make it easier for the retailers to operate. And to get there, it requires technology, it requires resources, and it requires continuously investing in your overall growth and B2B marketing and so on. And that's frankly not what we're seeing across the board.
Everybody wants a magic wand, right?
Of course.
Exactly.
Of course.
The internet is magic. I think that's like a constant struggle, right? It is not magic. It takes a lot of money and a lot of resources and strategy on being able to narrow down where you want to focus your efforts and energy. And nothing is magic. It's not going to
It's not a quick fix.
It's not a quick fix.
Well, and you two spend a lot more time in the overall retail space. Are you seeing this as a challenge across all individual business functions within a retailer, or is it really just focused on these tertiary components like retail media?
I see it in a lot of places. It really comes down to there's always multiple pain points, right? And multiple challenges. I don't think any retailer is lucky enough to say, nope, we just have this one challenge that we got to solve and then everything is perfect. I don't think that exists. So it's always a function of, well, what do I prioritize? What challenge am I going to solve first, second, and third? And that's where the dollars flow, right? The dollars go to whatever I think is the biggest pain point. I think depending on at a macro level what's going on, I find retailers will say, well, I haven't invested enough in my supply chain yet, so I need to do something there to protect the business and to gain an advantage. So that might be first. And there are others who maybe their CMO looks at it from a marketing perspective and says, okay, where can I stimulate more growth by either expanding the customer base, finding a new target segment to go after? Do I need to, and maybe the answer becomes, I need personalization, or maybe that's where the answer is, we don't have a retail media network and we have all these different products we sell. That could be a growth spot. And then some investment gets directed in that. Or it could be that someone says our store operations aren't where they need to be. We need to do some improvement there before we go after these other growth issues. So I see a lot of variation, just depending on where a given retailer is at.
Yeah, my conversations get a lot of, Like we're at beginning stages. It's matured a certain point, but I work with a sector of the retail industry that doesn't deal with Amazon or Walmart.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
and doesn't see it as a competitive threat, or
they don't sell there. And like their customer may not be there. So, there's a whole group of retail that are anti-Amazon.
Yeah.
So these conversations are just a little bit more newer, where RMNs are more sophisticated. And so they're coming onto a more sophisticated app and they're trying to play catch up. Like, wait a minute, what? What are we doing now?
What seems to be true is that the strongest RMNs have turned this into an overall flywheel generator for them. And the space, certainly in the infancy of any RMN, the focus is on driving highly profitable dollars into the business and growing operating income. As they mature, or as they go through their phases of growth, they realize that in order for them to continue to scale, they need to create mutually beneficial value for the advertisers or their suppliers, themselves, and their customers. And so when you can treat retail media as something that is actually driving overall business growth and growth for your advertisers, that's when it becomes truly successful and scalable. And I think back to your question on what happens over the next 2 years, we're at a stage now where there's such a gap between the top and the mid and bottom that if you're not figuring out how to get to a competitive place in the next 2 years, you're likely not going to be able to play in this space in 2 years. And so we really want to focus on getting the market to a place where there's some strong 10 through 30th players that can truly compete.
Yeah.
We need some flywheels.
Yes.
Yeah.
Many.
Yeah. That makes me think of a different question. So in a lot of other types of markets, and you get so much of these new players popping up, eventually there's consolidation, right? Where there's just, there are too many, the market can't sustain that many. But in this case, though, it seems like that would be hard to do because every RMN is truly a standalone entity within the walls of a given retailer. So you've got your two behemoths, right? Amazon and Walmart, and then everybody else catching up in a sense, and any new ones that come in. Is that something you think could happen in this space? Could we see RMNs banding together and to try to get more strength that way?
I think there's complementary RMNs that could work together. Where the space is seeing consolidation right now is in creating these marketplaces or networks. And I don't think that's the play. I think exactly to your point, individual retailers are so nuanced and have such bespoke expectations of their experience with their customers, of what happens in their business, of the growth that they're seeing or they're expecting. And when you just push your inventory and you push your data into a marketplace, it's simply not driving the growth or value that retailers are expecting. And what I've seen across the board is retailers seeding their inventory and seeding their data to marketplaces, and then within 2-3 months changing paths because it just doesn't work for them. And then back to your other point, like even at an individual retailer level that is part of a bunch of separate banners, even those, there's a unique subset within that requires uniqueness across the board. So yes, I don't think marketplace is the answer, but I do think you've got complementary retailers like a hardware store and a airline and a travel company that can come together and create mutually beneficial value, so long as they are willing to allow someone else to capture some of the monies that are flowing in from the sale.
Yeah, no, I think finding these intersections and interesting intersections, I think is key. And we learn so much more about our customers. And that kind of brings us to first party data. It's often described as the gold mine, right? But is it really? I have my own thoughts. Ricardo has his own thoughts. We're probably on opposite sides of this. How should brands be leveraging it beyond just handing it over to a trade desk?
I want to be biased by your thoughts now. Okay, I'll go first and then I'll ask you. I'm very interested in this conversation. I think it is misused or misunderstood, first party data. And what seems to be true is that every retailer has varying levels of access to their own data. And the other thing is that there are places you can go in the market today that give you the majority of the population. And so if as a baseline you are working to reach a specific audience, you can do that at scale with certain retailers, and therefore you don't necessarily need to go to a smaller subset. What I believe to be true, and what seems to be true in the space overall, is that advertisers are looking for more control over access to that data. And so they're expecting retailers to open up the pipes and allow them to merge their psychographic and demographic data with the retailer transactional data and create some type of new sophisticated approach to reaching consumers. That doesn't necessarily work. And I think it's placing an old media mindset on this new area that is much closer to point of purchase and much closer to understanding what truly happens as a result of your ads. There's a gentleman named Paul Lentz at CVS. I was with him a couple of days ago on this Digiday Media Buying Summit. And he said that one of the things that we're really, really good at is deterministically predicting how people are going to buy and then reaching those consumers in the places that matters most, that has the highest impact on their overall propensity to buy. And frankly, I don't think anyone but a retailer can do that today at scale.
Yeah. Well, I believe first party data is private. Nobody should have access to it. The customer owns their data. They should be able to take it wherever they want, use it, full data interoperability. So I'm way over on this side. But yeah, it's very interesting. It's going to be very interesting to also see how consumers, as they become more and more aware of how their data is used and their first party data is used, how they feel about it. So I don't think we're there yet. Industry's still trying to figure it out and really define a lot of these things. I don't think it's necessarily made it down to the customer level. I think last year, the general consumer now knows what Shopify is versus Spotify, right? I mean,
and you're going to get to this individual consumer RMNs. Is every single person going to be monetizing themselves?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Or what's better than cash?
Fair.
I think the more consumers monetize their data, the cheaper data ends up being, and we get like a check for like $3.97 while somebody else made $1 billion.
Right.
So, nobody's sending me a Ferrari for using my data. But if they'd like to, I'd like to.
If only they did. If only they did.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a tough one because you're right. I think consumers are getting more and more educated on what it means to make your data accessible and available to others. And when you do that, what does that mean those other people get to do with your data? So I think it does get more challenging, both on the retailer side, the brand side, on how do you access this gold mine of knowledge about who my potential buyer may be and how can I make myself more appealing to that buyer versus my competitor. So I do think, I agree. I don't think we're quite there where we need to be. I think maybe where we're getting with RMNs is approaching a level where we can be a little bit more precise, potentially without actually giving away all those details to the individual level, right?
Yes.
What I do find was really interesting that we haven't quite gotten into, but I kind of want to lead us there a little bit, is when you start to think of in-store media placement, and when we start to get into other areas like connected TV and how RMNs are connecting with that, and these other partner networks and things, and how all of that data sharing starts to paint a bigger picture about who the consumers are, not necessarily down to an individual level, but certainly the possibilities there. So I think questions from the technology point of view of how does the technology make it so that Casey's comfortable that her data is not being 100% identified down to an infinitesimal level to every brand that wants to know who Casey is so they can market to her, but yet still allows either the retailer to go to a brand and say, hey, we can tell you a lot about this cohort, for example, or about this segment that we know is your target market.
Yeah.
But where's that happy medium, and where do all these other things like non-endemic advertisers, which for in-store advertising, I think that's where a lot of retailer networks want to go, because they want to open up the pool to a broader base of potential advertisers. And then all these partner network connections we see with the streaming TV providers, with connected TVs, Walmart buying Vizio, for example, I think is a great example of that. What does all of that mean to us in this context of first-party data?
Yeah, I'm very excited about CTV.
That was a lot.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It is.
I think we should talk about in-store. I think in-store
let's
is...
talk about in-store.
No. Yeah, well, so we should separate that, though. But
Okay.
I believe CTV is an interesting conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think, Casey, this goes back to the concern on data utilization and how it's flowing. I think it's worth considering that the media industry that is powered by advertising is trying to figure out how to clamp on to this new trend that is retail media. And I say trend knowing that this thing is going to continue to grow and evolve, and more monies will flow into it. But it is accelerating so quickly that everybody is trying to take a piece of those budgets, especially in the case that those budgets are going to leave traditional media vehicles and move into retail media, of which, companies like CTV companies and linear television funded businesses are going to potentially lose share. And in that, it's worth considering that maybe they're not doing this the right way. Maybe it's not based on data, but it is simply based on maintaining access to the dollars that advertisers are paying. In a more optimistic view, hopefully we can create an ecosystem from leveraging retailer data that is much more deterministic and works harder. And so we can ensure that we're not just arbitrarily assigning value to individual demographics, but that we're using real transactional data, anonymized and consolidated, that is going to make sure that the dollars that are going into advertising are actually going to drive real results for advertisers. And in doing so, you're seeing maybe a much more efficient buy that will help brands grow and help retailers grow and help create value for CTV companies and so on.
Yeah.
Did that really answer the question?
Part of it.
Part of it. Yeah. Well, we'll come. Yeah.
In-store is fascinating to me. And I spent a lot of time...
It's really its own thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time at Walmart. And when I took over the stores and we were figuring out how do we rapidly accelerate investment in that area as a tertiary component of our online advertising business, we had about 80 companies that were powering some type of ad experience in the stores. It could have been regional. Wow. It could have been someone just sliding a physical sign at shelf somewhere. And my key assumption was that if you could just consolidate that effort into 5 or 6 different companies, you could create much more control over it. You could capture share of those budgets, and you could make it much more efficient for advertisers to buy and retail media businesses, or Walmart specifically, to operate it. What I didn't realize was that ecosystem is ingrained in the ways of working of core retail. And so those 80 companies may be selling ads at a retail store in exchange for offering resources to the retailer to stock the shelves, as one example. And so by just ripping out random companies that were selling ads at an individual retailer, you actually can disrupt the labor in those stores and disrupt the ability for brands to get products on shelf. So this the point is that
that's great.
Wow.
The point is this ecosystem is so ingrained in the ways of working of retail today. The other thing that's worth noting on that point is that this exists at scale across all of retail. And so we are coming in from a digital lens, which is frankly where most retail media leaders come from. You approach this in an efficiency standpoint. You say, how do I put digital screens in the store and create a programmatic offering? That's not in store. In store today, physical signage and events, demos. And so if you can just simply take what exists today, optimize it in a way that makes it much more efficient to manage, and then keep it running, that I think is the much smarter play than trying to create something that's net new in that environment.
Speaking of managing, a lot of these brands are managing like 10 to 15 platforms to run their retail media initiatives. So multimedia marketing is quite the handful, especially for a lot of brands that already have full plates. You know, nobody is bored in retail. I think we can all agree with that. How would you suggest brands to unify and streamline their approach that would make it more effective or efficient?
I would push it back to the retailers. It should be a brand expectation of the retailer. Vantage did a survey with Digiday recently, and what it said was something that I found so fascinating was that individual brands in 2025 are going to double the amount of retail media businesses that they're advertising on.
Wow.
And so you're growing from, it looks like about 6 to 12 RMNs. And then Casey, to your point, within an individual RMN, you've actually got multiple ways to buy. And so if you're an advertiser, not only are you buying on, say, 12 retail media businesses, you're then going into 5 different tools at an individual retailer to do that. The retailer, if they're operating on managed service support, they're likely using 10 different tools to do that work. And they're flowing information between systems in a manual, email-based, spreadsheet-based way. That doesn't scale.
Always a spreadsheet.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. What we do at Vantage, and we did this with the Home Depot as an example. When we took over the Home Depot retail media business from a platform standpoint, there were 10 different tools. Vantage created a workflow, a unification layer on top of those tools, and drove connections into all of these different systems of record, so that you could create automated workflow. Your teams would have a single tool to use to run the business end to end, and that individual users within that tool had access to just their component of that overall business. So streamline workflow, make it easier to manage the business. And then by doing that, by connecting a bunch of different buying tools, you can then offer self-serve solutions to advertisers in an omnichannel way. And I don't think we get to that place until you create this unification of tools. What's disappointing me right now in this space is that a lot of the time retailers are comfortable with this idea of making it hard for advertisers to buy. And so, Casey, going back to your point, I think we need brands to really push this, that if you're going to make it hard for me, unfortunately, I just can't participate.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does this come down to, in some ways, almost a training issue or just a general, I'll put it this way, it feels like part of what you're saying is on the retailer side, there's just a general lack of understanding how the media and advertising business works. Maybe because you're asking teams to own the RMN who are folks who aren't coming from that ad space. And so they have to learn 100% of what's going on. And they're just not at the beginning, probably out of necessity, right? Because they're being asked to solve something through technology. And it's not just a tech problem.
Totally. We talked about this before, that there's no school for this. Yeah. There's no expert in this space.
Yeah. Right.
Yet.
Right.
Except ourselves. I think we can pat ourselves.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. That's right.
But I think that you're right. This is the challenge. Either you put someone that is already within the retail business into a new media role and expect them to know how to sell advertising to agencies and marketers and brand buyers, or you take someone from a straight media space and put them into a retailer and expect them to understand the intricacies and nuances of retail. And both of those things don't work. So this is a new mindset, and this is a new type of role that hasn't truly existed yet, that we need to figure out how to create on an ongoing basis. I think the other component of this that's worth noting is that retailers are, in an effort to not invest in the growth initially, that they are commingling resources internally. So the person that is running creative for a retailer specifically and running brand activations for that retailer is now being asked to support creative development for the 1,000 brands that are advertising in the RMN. And it is a fundamentally different headspace and a lot of switching. And what we're seeing, and what I've heard a lot from retailers that are not, or people within retail that are not in the RMN, is that retail media is taking a disproportionate amount of their time because they are forced to support a much larger scaled business than they're resourced for.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
I always suggest when people are outside of the retail industry and they're looking to hire, I always say, go to retail.
Yeah.
Don't trust the resume. These people are doing 6 jobs that have nothing to do with each other. They probably picked one job title, but they're probably doing 6 different jobs. It's such an opportunity to learn, to take everywhere else. So I do think that this talent gap will be filled. Definitely will be filled, because it is getting put on a lot of people that wouldn't necessarily have that opportunity. That may not have been something that was like a hired job that was searched out. Somebody in the organization is getting that put on their desk. Yeah. And so I think it's a great opportunity. I think we're going to have a lot of fun with this.
And to this point, and I put you two in this camp too, retail is amazing. It is so intricate, nuanced, and there's so many subcomponents to it that you wouldn't consider. Getting, shopping to all of America, being able to provide those type of services. Be obsessively curious about it. It is so interesting how the world shops. And I think the profile I look for in anyone in the retail media space and anyone in the retail space is someone that actually is genuinely curious about how things work.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. This is one of those areas where I like to say the most important, if I sum it down to one word that you're looking for someone to say, is why. It's always the why question that sparks this curiosity and moves this forward. In some ways, we're saying, like, when we're all looking for a retirement job, we're all going to go into education and start teaching how to do this for that next generation of retail media folks.
Yeah, agreed.
So we've got, I think every episode on the Retail Razor emphasizes increase your tech budget, start deploying solutions, push to production, get something out the door. But winners and fizzlers. If you had to place a bet on one retail media trend that you feel will dominate this year, 2025, what would it be? And then, on the flip side, what do you think's overhyped?
I think workflow automation is a key priority in our space, not only because it's necessary for operational efficiency, but it's necessary for creating a competitive offering. If you're doing everything off spreadsheets and emails, you are not creating a media offering that can compete with Meta and Google and Amazon and Walmart. And I say that knowing that even in those businesses that there's inefficiencies and a lot of tech debt and certainly things aren't flowing as efficiently as they could be, but you need to invest in finding operational efficiencies and making it easier for your team to both operate and then scale the business. I think the things that I'm less excited about now, just because I think they're ill understood, are things like CTV and in-store and digital at home and what has become kind of these core growth pillars for retail media. What seems to be happening in our space is that people are clamoring for quote unquote new demand for places where monies are sitting that can then just flow into the individual retailer, or they're clamoring for new inventory sources because they think that by just opening up a new channel, they are going to get more money. And we're, in doing that, making it actually much harder for advertisers to buy because you're not creating that workflow automation. You're not unifying those tools. And so you're just adding another layer of complexity every time you open up something new in today's construct. And so I believe that there are legs for CTV and digital at home, and we've seen much stronger momentum in other markets outside of the US. But I think there's a lot of work we need to do in order to accelerate those things before just saying, open up your inventory and data.
I think you just brought something up that is a huge cultural divide between retail and media, is that a new store equaled more money. But a new channel does not equal more money. And so
it's more work and more investment.
Over the last few years, we have just been shutting down so many stores, and it used to be how we made money is open up a new store. We've got opening up 1,000 new stores equals this amount of money. That's not necessarily how the digital marketing works and these channels. And I bet it's a very interesting thing we could double click on.
Yeah.
And coming from the lens of a SaaS business, it is really fascinating, and I've been running up against this a lot, is that comparison. The comparison of either, exactly to your point, they know that model. The CFO at a retailer understands the base economics of retail in minute detail. When you introduce this new thing, every model breaks, and it looks ridiculous. I was looking at we were value selling the other day, and I was looking at the CapEx requirement for relative to the CapEx that the retailer did in totality, and then the contribution to the operating income. And it was something like, for 0.5% of your annual CapEx, you can build a business that is going to be worth 10% of your operating income in 5 years. That is so crazy that they're afraid of it, and that it is just too audacious to believe that it's possibly true. But it is true because we've seen it in Amazon and Walmart and Home Depot and CVS. And so,
it is, I think I still include myself on the brand side, even though I've been on the tech side for a very long time. We're used to making decisions without data. 20 years, I made decisions without data. You get a very good gut, like your gut rules a lot of the decisions that you make. And a lot of times, you just feel comfortable. You know what to expect for no rhyme or reason, other than it's worked in the past over and over and over again, and it's driven my business. And I feel comfortable making these decisions without data. And then you show me a brand all this data, and these numbers are ridiculous. And it's scary because you have to let go of this trust that you didn't you didn't have before. It hasn't driven your career. It hasn't grown the business over the last 25 years. And there is this like comfort of shooting from your hip, regardless of the data. I don't like purple.
Right.
Cut it. I don't want this. Cut it. Close the store. Like,
on this point, I'm still very bullish about retail media. I still think there's a lot of room to grow. I think there's certainly much more effort we need to take by way of investment and creating competitive offerings. But what I will say at a more macro level within retail is I think of retail media as a catalyst for overall change within their organizations, that you're asking a retailer to do something, exactly to your point, Casey, that they're very uncomfortable with, that this is a new business model, it's a new way of operating. You're changing the dynamic of the relationship between your advertisers or suppliers and your merchants. But it's a necessary change. And it's not going to be just retail media. There are many things that I'm not smart enough to consider at this point that are going to come out of this change in retail. But it's a catalyst for what becomes a future model within retail overall. And that's why I think it's really, really important for retailers to take this seriously, that change is going to drive their future growth overall.
Yeah. Is that sort of a way of saying that this is the next big shift in digital advertising, and it's the retailer's opportunity in a sense almost to potentially lose if they miss out?
Yeah. I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Well, Drew, this has been a fantastic conversation on retail media, where it came from, where it's headed. And I know everyone listening has had to have some incredible takeaways. I know I have. Rewind, take notes. You've shared some really great gems here.
Yep. And I think as everybody who follows the show knows, we could easily keep talking about this for hours and hours. I mean, Casey probably has to find a way to virtually kick me under the table to get us to stop talking retail media, because it's one of my favorite topics. But I have to say thank you so much for coming on the show and joining us. I really give us a very different perspective and unique vision on what's happening. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Well, our first episode of the new season is officially wrapped. Thank you, Drew. If you enjoyed our show, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Good Pods. Remember to smash that subscribe button in your favorite podcast player, or like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a minute. And a big thank you to our amazing Good Pods listeners for helping us consistently rise to the top 3 spots in the indie management, indie marketing podcast charts with every episode. I'm your co-host, Casey Golden.
Please follow us and share your feedback at Retail Razor on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, Threads, and Instagram. And if you want to preview each episode right in your email inbox, subscribe to our Substack newsletter for highlights and full episode transcripts. I'm your host, Ricardo Belmar.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time, keep cutting through the clutter and stay sharp. This is the Retail Razor Show.